Chapter 221, Funeral and Fudge. It was 2 in the afternoon. Number 12, Grimald Place, the Black family house, received its first real visitors in over a decade. Though they had come for a funeral, their presence brought life back into the long deserted rooms. The green flames in the fireplace kept leaping, and people kept emerging from the hearth. The sky above was a dull, oppressive gray, and low-hanging clouds seemed to press on everyone's mood. In that solemn atmosphere, they had all gathered for Regulus's funeral. On the lawn behind the house, black banners fluttered and rustled like whispers of the departed's name. Dumbledore stood quietly before the coffin, a eulogy clutched in his hand. The Weasleys stood together in the crowd, their faces worn with grief. Arthur held Molly's hand tightly, trying to give her strength. Their children, Percy, Fred, George, Ron, and Ginny, stood in heavy silence. Lupin lingered apart. Unlike many, he truly had had a good impression of Regulus, who had not treated him differently when he learned Lupin was a werewolf. The Malfoys were present too. After all, Regulus was Draco's uncle by blood. Funerals are weighty affairs. The living tend to speak little, for chatter feels like disrespect. In one corner, Eno stood in a black satin robe, merely nodding to familiar faces. Time passed. Fudge and a number of ministry officials arrived as well. Many had not been formally invited, but England's wizarding community was small and already abuzz. Whether they came to pay respects or to be seen remained unclear. Whatever their reasons, their faces wore an appropriate sorrow. At 3 o'clock, tiny snowflakes began to fall from the gray sky. The fine white dust settled on the black coffin with a soft hush. As the snow fell, Eno eased his wand further up his sleeve, his hand steady but alert. Dumbledore stepped forward and read the eulogy. His voice was gentle and firm, each word clear and measured, as he spoke of Regulus's brief life, his courage, his quiet wisdom, and the spirit of sacrifice that had marked him. Those gathered reacted in their own ways. Some were deeply moved, some merely attentive. When the eulogy ended, people stepped forward to lay their flowers on the grave. Each bloom was a small sorrow, a private blessing, and together they formed a sea of color around the headstone. The sky stayed its dull gray, but among the flowers Eno thought for a fleeting instant he could see the young man's figure behind the stone. It faded almost at once, and Eno set the white cosmos he carried onto the pile, keeping his thoughts to himself. As mourners began to leave, the coffin-bearers, Andromeda and Tonks, Lucius and his wife among them, the fireplace in Grimald Place flickered. Many people remained behind. Draco had slipped away from his parents and quietly rejoined the group. Eno glanced over. "Why aren't you going home?" he asked. "This isn't your main stage." "Main stage?" Draco sounded puzzled at first, then realized how conspicuous 7 or 8 red-haired people could be. "I'm fine with you here. They won't dare do anything with you around." Eno shook his head at the boyish pride. He had planned to speak with the twins. He had an interesting Christmas gift idea, but with Draco beside him, that would be a risky move. Bringing a Malfoy to confront Weasleys would be more than merely stirring trouble. He let the thought go. There were other places he could visit if necessary. Inside the house, in the spacious drawing room, Fudge had taken to speaking to small groups, his expression all solemnity. The show of grief was deliberate. One might have thought his own brother lay in the coffin. Yet the mask slipped fast. When he saw someone approaching, his posture shifted into that practiced blend of flattering attention and political calculation. "Excuse me for interrupting, Minister," Eno said calmly. It was his first meeting with Cornelius Fudge, but he had no strong prejudices. People were rarely only black or white. Positions and perspectives complicated everything. Fudge's face brightened considerably when he noticed Draco leaning nearby. There are truths the ambitious can read in a single detail. "How fortunate!" Fudge cried, voice a little hoarse but earnest in gesture. "Whenever I see young people like you, I feel hopeful for the future of the English wizarding world. Truly fortunate." "Thank you for your praise, Minister," Eno replied, inclined his head. Then he produced a yellowed, slightly brittle parchment from his robes. "I came to clarify something about Regulus. This is his handwriting." Fudge took the paper and inspected the childish script. He did not seem surprised. His attendance at the funeral had already been a quiet acknowledgement, a decision made. Eno intended to make the will public. There were many ways to spread the truth, but nothing matched the ministry's authority. After a long, serious moment, Fudge handed the parchment back with a solemn nod. "Leave this to me. No one will forget Regulus's contribution." For once, Eno saw a rare and honest note of sincerity in the politician's face. Chapter 222, Madame Puddifoot's Tea House. The year 1993 came to be called by many the Year of Black. In that year, something utterly unexpected happened to both scions of the House of Black, Sirius and Regulus. After reports in the Daily Prophet, Dumbledore, Fudge, and others issued statements in quick succession. The tragedies that befell the Black brothers changed how many people viewed that ancient pureblood family. For a brief moment, there were even whispers calling for a reinvestigation of Bellatrix, a suggestion that she too might have been wronged. The voice vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed up by more powerful currents in the ministry. When dissent like that surfaced, it was almost always the result of pressure from another pureblood lineage. In this case, the answer was obvious: the Longbottoms, one of the Sacred 28. The Longbottoms were an old pureblood family whose influence rivaled the Blacks, and because generations of them had served as aurors and in other prominent positions, their reach was in many ways greater. But no matter how loudly the world talked, it only affected those who listened. It was the 5th day of the Christmas holidays. Hogsmeade had no fresh snowfall that morning, but a thin sheet of white frost still glittered on the streets. Madame Puddifoot had been up early preparing. During the holidays, her little tea shop was a favorite of 3rd years and older. Imagine, on a cold Christmas day, sitting in a warm tea shop with someone you liked, sipping sweet hot drinks while watching snow fall over Hogsmeade through the window. Those were the basic conditions. Madame Puddifoot's true talent, however, was her candy making. Even when no one ordered anything, a pot of pink syrup always bubbled gently on the hearth, filling the shop with a sweet scent that put every pair who came through the door in a romantic mood. And most people who came weren't alone, or if they arrived alone, rarely stayed that way. Madame Puddifoot stirred the syrup and smiled as she glanced at a small booth by the window in the 3rd row. A brown-haired girl had been sitting there alone for quite a while. From experience, the shopkeeper knew this wouldn't last. The girl was pretty enough. If her hair were tamed with a little conditioner and a touch of witch's lipstick and eyeshadow, she'd be irresistible to many boys. Madame Puddifoot was curious which boy had kept the girl waiting, and the bell over the door answered her question. "Merry Christmas, Madame Puddifoot," Eno greeted as he came in. Hogsmeade was small. After living there for over a year, he knew many of the shopkeepers by now. "Merry Christmas, but be quick. She's been waiting," Madame Puddifoot said, nodding toward the little booth. Eno pushed open the wooden door hung with a Christmas wreath and ducked into the cubicle. It was tiny, maybe a dozen square feet, steam-warm, with red leather-backed chairs facing one another and a round pink table covered with a bow-adorned cloth. In such close quarters, 2 people sitting face-to-face would inevitably bump knees. Madame Puddifoot clearly knew how to make the most of the space. "Christmas," Eno called cheerfully, and sat down opposite the girl. There was the inevitable bump as he took his seat. "Merry Christmas, Hermione." "Merry Christmas," Hermione replied brightly, cheeks flushed as if from the fireplace warmth. "I heard people say the caramel coffee here is delicious, so I thought we should meet here." "Is it really that good?" Eno asked. "Although I know Madame Puddifoot, this is my first time here." Hermione pushed a cup toward him, pleased by his company. He took a cautious sip and made a small face. "How about we go to the 3 Broomsticks? It's not very comfortable in here." Madame Puddifoot's caramel drink was very sweet, more like concentrated syrup than coffee, and too cloying for his taste. Hermione's voice rose a little. "Is that so? I can move in further if you'd like, then you'll have more space." She slid further in, changing her mind twice in a quarter hour, from eager anticipation to shy reserve when she saw him, to the realization that he, too, was uncomfortable. Now the small tea shop felt like her home turf again. They left Madame Puddifoot's and went next door to the 3 Broomsticks Inn. "You 2 should be at Puddifoot's, not mine," Madame Rosmerta said with a glance as they entered. "We just came from there," Eno replied with a laugh. "But I prefer the atmosphere here." He led Hermione to a larger table in the corner. Of course, he knew all about Madame Puddifoot. Living in Hogsmeade long enough taught you the place and its people. The complaint about the cloying coffee in cramped space was mostly an excuse. Eno had a clear understanding of these things. He'd once told Draco that the crushes and vague attractions of school were normal adolescent symptoms. Sudden and intense, like a summer thunderstorm, and usually temporary. Feelings needed time to grow. This was only the middle of third year. If they were going to date properly, it could wait at least until after the OLs in fifth year. Watching Hermione nursing a quiet sulk at the Three Broomsticks, Eno decided he ought to find time to have a proper talk with her. A little feigned ignorance was acceptable now and then, but if it became a habit, it would start to hurt. It's the beginning of the month. Xiao Di is asking for votes. Votes, votes, votes. Big shots. Please cast a vote. Xiao Di's share for today. The Burrow. The Burrow is where the Weasley family lives, outside Ottery St. Catchpole in Devon. It's a small, magically expanded house Harry thought of as a second home. After Dumbledore's death in 1997, it became a headquarters for the Order of the Phoenix. During the height of the Second Wizarding War, the family had to abandon it because it had become a target for Death Eaters. The Burrow is well hidden from Muggles. Mrs. Weasley once joked that Muggle postmen simply don't know where our house is. The Burrow sits among rolling hills and fertile fields. Nearby live the Diggories, the Lovegoods, and the Fawcetts. Chapter 223. After listening, Hermione turned and left. Edited. 2 foaming mugs of butterbeer sat on the table beside a small plate of crisp pine nut biscuits. Eno's eyes kept drifting to Hermione across from him. She had changed so much since their third year. The freckle-toothed little girl he remembered had quietly grown into a poised young woman, now almost shoulder height to him. By the latter half of her third year, she'd already passed 160 centimeters. It was hard to imagine how much more she would grow by the time the Goblet of Fire came around. Perhaps because women are naturally sensitive to looks, Hermione tightened her lips when she felt a glance sweep over her teeth. Then she remembered the orthodontic work she'd had done last summer and let her smile out again without shame. Play to your strengths was a phrase she heard constantly in her dormitory, and she'd taken it to heart. Eno considered how to phrase what he needed to say without wounding her pride. Girls their age were delicate and prone to interpret things in all kinds of ways. He wanted to be careful. He took a sip of butterbeer, felt the coolness chase down his throat, and found a conversation opener. Hermione, do you know Charles Dickens? He asked. Her eyes brightened at the literary turn. Of course, the great 19th century English novelist, The Old Curiosity Shop, Oliver Twist, Dombey and Son, A Tale of Two Cities. She rattled off titles with the confident certainty he knew well. He's magnificent. Eno nodded appreciatively. There's another much-loved book, published in 1943, that stands with A Tale of Two Cities on many bestseller lists. He paused to watch her reaction. If she hadn't read it, he'd change tack. Hermione didn't hesitate. The Little Prince, she said. She wasn't wrong. Clever people often think alike. Hermione's answer came quickly. Then her smile faded into a quieter, more thoughtful expression. She understood the book's philosophy, and beneath that she'd always felt the Little Prince's story was a melancholy love tale. The Fox and the Rose were not wrong, she believed, especially the Rose. Its arrogance sprang from being doted on without restraint. That made Eno's choice of topic risky. He'd mentioned the book on purpose, hoping for something, anything, and he'd guessed the answer. Still, he watched the small shift in her face and felt the urgency of saying what needed to be said now rather than later. If the roles were reversed, he asked, and you were the Little Prince, what would you do? Hermione faltered. She'd always identified with the female figures in stories, the Rose or the Fox, and this was the first time she'd been asked to imagine herself as the prince. If I were the Little Prince, she began slowly, I'd befriend the Rose first, and then... Her voice cut off. That sliver of hope went out of her like a candle. The failure of the Little Prince's love had been, in her view, the prince's blind, naive devotion. Whatever came next, Hermione took his question as a gentle refusal. All right then, she said, eyes rimmed red. She stood abruptly and walked to the door with a decisive, almost panicked stride. Rational understanding and a personal ache warred in her, and she wanted to get away before either could overrun her. The two-way mirror in her pocket, the one she'd meant to give today, felt suddenly like a mocking object. What had been intended as a gift now seemed pointless. Eno finished his butterbeer without trying to follow. Catching up wouldn't change the moment any more than arguing would. Sometimes the only thing to do for both of them was give each other space. "You should go after her," Madame Rosmerta said quietly as she approached the table. "I don't know what you two talked about, but as a gentleman you shouldn't leave a girl upset." "In school, feelings are vague," Eno responded instinctively. "They're not always straightforward." Madame Rosmerta laughed softly at being lectured about feelings by a teenager. "Maybe you're right, but take my advice. Don't do something you'll regret later." He listened and nodded, taking her words seriously. Half an hour later, Eno didn't go home. Instead, he detoured to Flourish and Blots. Magic felt profound and mysterious to others, but to him, alchemy was closer to a muggle discipline. Straightforward at first, anyone with a brain and the willingness to learn could get competent, but progressively harder the deeper you went. Masters were scarce. In nearly 50 years in England, only one Dumbledore-level alchemist had emerged, and even he had been notable mostly for material breakthroughs. He ducked into a narrow, time-worn shop that felt removed from the world, faded signboard, no more than 10 square meters of space, walls mottled by time. Standing at Old Bands' door always brought a sense of being set apart from the storms of the world, like a reef left unshaken by any tide. The door was open. Inside, the decor was sparing, a long walnut table, 2 high-backed chairs, a simple shelf, and Old Bands himself sat at one of the chairs, white-haired and sharp-eyed as ever. "Come in. Why are you lingering at the door? Taking my portrait?" Old Bands called in his gentle voice. Eno grinned and took a stool. "Next time I'll take your picture with the antique camera you gave me. I'll enter it in a magazine contest for most charming old wizard in the British Isles." Old Bands put down his tools and smiled. "Don't drag me into that. Dumbledore has that title sewn up. If I tried, the Dumbledore Research Society would have my head." "In my book, you're the keeper of time," Eno said, "like an old man who watches over the years." Old Bands considered the epithet with a glint of pleasure. "Old man of time, is it? I like it. For that, you get 10% off today. Now tell me, what do you want? A one-handed sword? A knight's lance? One-handed sword? A knight's lance?" Those familiar, yet oddly out-of-place words made Eno rub his forehead as if to clear cobwebs from his mind. For Old Bands, maybe only a year had passed, but Eno had lived through several stories, nearly 3 years' worth of adventures, and that small shift in time sat oddly with him. He pushed up his thick, square-rimmed glasses and asked with genuine concern, "What's wrong? You've been a little off since you came in." Eno leaned back in the chair and let his eyes travel over the mottled plaster of the wall before he sighed. "Nothing important, just thinking about how time slips away, how everything fades." "Don't get sentimental. How old do you think you are?" Old Bands shook his head with a wry smile. "If you're going to mourn the years, what am I supposed to do then?" He added in a teasing tone, "How about I get you a knight's lance? They're great fun. They even glow at night." The childish coaxing made Eno smile. He hadn't felt this kind of plain, elder affection in a long time. Even Dumbledore treated him more as a colleague than as someone to fuss over. "I don't need a knight's lance," Eno said. "I've been studying alchemy." Old Bands blinked. Alchemy was rarely chosen now. Students preferred potions, herbology, or more practical subjects. "You took up alchemy?" "Mostly for the fun of it," Eno answered, glancing at the storage shelf, cluttered with tools. "It's a hobby. It keeps me from being bored." Old Bands looked half amused, half exasperated. "Bored? You're a 3rd year at Hogwarts, and you're complaining about boredom?" Eno nodded seriously. "There isn't much to do. Quidditch, gobstones, wizard chess, exploding snap, chocolate frogs, that's about it. Wizarding entertainment is thin. Radios and records have been around only a few decades, and they're still limited." Old Bands chuckled. "So you plan to invent new toys?" "Not toys. New media." Eno shook his head. Then, in a few short, eager minutes, he sketched out to Old Bands the development of Muggle entertainment, television, films, videotapes, ways Muggles had multiplied and recorded their stories. "That's amazing. Old Bands said, eyes bright, like the two-way mirror or the mirror of Erised. Old Bands then grew thoughtful and spoke of alchemy's lost capabilities. In theory, it shouldn't be impossible. The old alchemical formulas hinted at complete imaging techniques, but their depths were so great and knowledge so patchy that later generations couldn't follow through. Eno frowned in agreement. Being ahead of Muggles in certain imaging concepts didn't mean those ideas were in use. High costs, conservative attitudes, and lost lines of knowledge had left many brilliant notions stranded in history. Old Bands sat back and studied the young man a moment. He saw a reflection of his younger self, an alchemist doing it for the love of it, brimming with odd, ambitious ideas. "If you want to try, then do it," he said. "I'll help where I can. Don't leave yourself with regrets. Otherwise, you'll end up like me, left to mind this little shop forever." "I will." Eno stretched out in the chair. The broom and wand clutter of Old Bands' shop felt more homely to him than 3 broomsticks ever did. Before he left, he made sure to ask about a sample, something with imaging magic he could study. Old Bands considered a moment. "You'll have to find the sample yourself, but I'll ask around. They're very scarce these days." Eno waved the concern away with a smile. No hurry, some things can't be forced. But he already had a specific target, the mirror of Erised hidden in the castle. A mirror that reflected a person's deepest desire. Surely such a high-grade artifact would contain the imaging knowledge alchemy had once used. Under the right light, unlocked, its secrets would be little challenge for someone patient and clever. He stayed until noon, trading stories and alchemical tricks with Old Bands. He showed the old man the Rowan wand he'd made. Old Bands teased it as a troll wand, but his praise was genuine enough. When Eno left, Old Bands pressed a yellowed notebook into his hands, a crumbling guide to wand making. What stayed with him most, though, were Old Bands' last words. "There are many alchemists who can make wands, but there is only one Ollivander in all of England." Those words felt like a benediction. Walking home through the quiet streets of Hogsmeade, Eno thought about how deep and strange the wizarding world really was. Hogwarts, he thought, was a fairy tale in its own right, endless, layered, and retold from one generation to the next. Harry's story was only one chapter. Newt had been the hero of another age, and both narratives were shaped by who was telling them. Like the Brothers Grimm traveling and collecting stories, Eno wanted to wander and record the oddities he saw. The story, he realized, would never end. It only changed narrators. He felt, suddenly and insistently, the urge to write a novel about Hogwarts, about the young wizards who lived in the castle and grew up in its strange, storied shadow. Ever since he'd bought a house in Hogsmeade, Eno had felt rooted, whether at Christmas or New Year. Even when he was alone in the house, he no longer felt like a wandering, rootless soul. He sat by the second-floor window and watched the faint bustle of the main street below, wisps of smoke curling from the chimneys of nearby cottages. Life was mostly like this. 1993 had passed quietly in the midst of it, and that year, like every other, the young wizards in the castle and the villagers in Hogsmeade were each playing out their own stories. The 15-day Christmas holiday flew by. On the day he returned to school, after packing his things, Eno set off alone for the castle. The second half of the term promised to be busy. Before it began, he had a few matters to settle, chief among them the Slytherin relic. After using the bronze oil lamp to transcribe all the hidden markings on the pendant, he never intended to keep it. He had promised to give it to Snape, and a promise was a promise. Besides, no one was more qualified to possess a purified Slytherin pendant than the Slytherin Dean. That was, of course, on the condition that Snape remained Dean. If he didn't, the pendant would have nothing to do with him. Trains were, as ever, unpunctual. When Eno arrived at the common room that afternoon, only a few students remained, those who had chosen to stay at school over the holidays. He returned their greetings politely, then went up to his dormitory to straighten his things and change into his robes. After that, he headed to Snape's office. He knocked. The potion classroom door opened on its own. Eno didn't waste time on small talk. He took the pendant from his pocket and laid it on the desk. "Professor, this should belong to you," he said quietly. "Slytherin's pendant, the thing Regulus gave his life to protect. It's been purified." He avoided saying the Dark Lord's name. Given everything he knew, it would have been awkward to say it aloud in front of Snape. Snape regarded the hollow carved pendant on the desk without immediate comment. He drew his wand, touched the pendant briefly, examined it, and then, after a careful inspection, said, in only a few words, "Leave it. It belongs to Slytherin." Eno smiled, understanding. "Yes, Professor, it belongs to Slytherin." It was easy to speak with someone who understood without much explanation. If there was nothing else to discuss, he would leave. "Goodbye, Professor," he added and turned. Snape's voice stopped him mid-step. "Certain objects, two-way mirrors, for example, can develop faults if they're left unused for too long. If any of your alchemical items go wrong, bring them to me." Eno blinked. "Two-way mirrors? Why would Snape think of that? You don't have one?" he asked, surprised. Snape's expression shifted. The controlled calm he usually wore faltered for a moment. "Should I?" He sounded almost unsettled. Then, abruptly, and in a tone that made the hair on Eno's neck prickle, Snape demanded, "Tell me what you did, who you saw, and what happened over the Christmas holiday." The office felt suddenly colder. Eno left with a strange, puzzled look fixed on his face. Hermione. The question, the sudden interest, the slight catch in Snape's voice. Everything fit. Snape's manner was usually aloof. He didn't concern himself with students' holiday comings and goings. Even with Harry, he kept his concern to unusual, private gestures, waiting outside the castle alone, or offering a particular kind of help in class. Yet here, Snape had asked Eno what he had done over the break, and when Eno spoke of Hermione leaving in a huff, Snape had shown irritation. Hermione's holiday letter, Snape's mention of two-way mirrors, the risk of long storage, and the ties between Gryffindor and Slytherin, all these facts threaded together and suggested an answer. The old generation's failures, Eno thought, hoped the new generation would finish what they'd left undone. He walked slowly down the dim corridor toward the Slytherin dormitory, thinking about Hermione. A week had passed since he and Dumbledore had discussed divination and fate before Regulus's funeral. He thought of the new kinds of media, the two-way mirror, the mirror of Erised in the Banshee's shop, and now Snape had told him Hermione had a pair of two-way mirrors. When so many coincidences aligned, it was hard to call it chance. Heavy with thought, Eno returned to the common room. It was far livelier than when he'd left. The return train had arrived, and the Slytherins, cold to everyone else but in their own element now, shed their reserve. "Eno," Draco sauntered over as soon as he saw him. "You've got to help me. I heard Scarhead's got a firebolt." "Firebolt?" Eno raised an eyebrow. That was another piece in the puzzle. Some things were meant to happen. Harry had gotten a new broom in his 3rd year, after all. "Yes, a firebolt," Draco went on, indignant. "He's got a broom that's better than professional standards. You have to help." "How do you want me to help? Ambush him and beat him up?" Eno asked in disbelief. He didn't play Quidditch. Draco's eyes flashed with a dangerous light. "Ambush him?" he repeated, then laughed it off. "I was joking. Not that I don't want to. Are you crazy?" Seeing Eno's face, he hurried to clarify. "No hitting, but we need you for the matches, cheerleading." Draco's tone grew serious and almost reverent. "We'll crush Scarhead on sheer momentum. Crush the Redhead. Crush Gryffindor. It's the beginning of the month. Shouty is asking for votes. Votes, votes, big shots. Please cast a vote." Shouty's daily entry, Sea Serpent, British Ministry of Magic, classification level, XXX. Origin and distribution. Sea serpents are found in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Mediterranean. Appearance. They can grow up to 100 feet long, with horse-like heads and long, sinuous bodies that often arch out of the sea. Abilities and uses. Though their appearance is terrifying, sea serpents have never been known to harm people. Muggles, however, have concocted many wild tales of their brutality. Chapter 226. Advice from Ginny. As the holidays ended, the dormitories buzzed with activity. Everyone seemed eager to share their joys and retell interesting moments from the break. In Gryffindor Common Room, the air felt almost like a small feast. Of course, where some were loud, others kept quieter company. In a corner of the room, Ginny sat on a sofa, brow slightly furrowed. As another girl, she understood all too well the ache of unrequited feelings. "Hermione, it's not the end of the world. You've got time. Some people are just slow to notice," Ginny murmured, glancing over at Harry, who was laughing with the others. "It would be better if he were slow," Hermione answered under her breath. Then I could teach him, step by step. Ginny smiled faintly. The Weasley girls usually weren't short on courage, but matters of the heart couldn't be fixed with a flick of a wand. After watching Harry for a few more seconds, she turned back to Hermione. So what are you going to do? If you let him slip away, someone else will grab him. I don't know, Hermione said, shaking her head. She really didn't know what to do. She felt she'd already tried everything. If she pushed any harder, she might not even be able to keep their friendship. Indecision means you're not resigned, Ginny cut to the chase. Hermione gave a small, involuntary nod. Of course she wasn't resigned. They'd known each other for years before Hogwarts. She couldn't just watch him drift away. Then make yourself known, Ginny advised. A lot of people do it this way. You don't need to make a big show. Just bump into him in the corridors, the classrooms, the Great Hall, wherever. At least don't let you both forget each other. Ginny spoke seriously, not mentioning that these exact tips were things Mrs. Weasley had taught her over the holidays. Bumping into him on purpose? Will that really work? Hermione protested. It felt like scheming. It is scheming, Ginny said frankly. She'd had the same doubts the first time her mother mentioned it. But Hogwarts is the sort of place where if you don't play the game, someone else will. After thinking for a moment, Hermione finally nodded. Time moved on. The second term began, and life returned to its usual rhythm. Classes, studying, Quidditch practice. Without Dementors in the sky, gloom was rare. The castle felt, more than ever, like the setting of a fairy tale. Early one weekend morning, Eno left his dormitory and headed straight for the headmaster's office. It had been almost a week into term, and he wanted to ask Dumbledore about the Mirror of Erised. Rounding a corridor, he saw a familiar, graceful figure. Hermione, who had been passing by so often in the last week he'd lost count. She walked with her chin held high, an elegant curve to her posture that made Eno smile inwardly. From a distance, he simply nodded a greeting. Friendships remained friendships, even when other things were uncertain. As Hermione passed, Eno sighed. That proud, graceful carriage was all too familiar. A little while later, he reached the headmaster's office on the 8th floor. Before he could say the password, the stone gargoyle guarding the door obligingly moved aside. The office that Umbridge had once wished to storm seemed open and undefended. After climbing the spiral staircase, Dumbledore came into view. "Good morning, Professor," Eno said with a smile. "I'm sorry to drop in unannounced, but there's something you hid that I'd like to see again." "Good morning," Dumbledore returned, standing. "It is rather rare for you to come by on your own. I've hidden many things in the castle. Some I can tell you about immediately, others must remain secret for a time." Dumbledore's words were layered, but Eno didn't care for riddles. "I'm here for the Mirror of Erised," he said plainly. Dumbledore paused at the name, then regained his composure. "The mirror is in the trophy room. If you need it, Fida can bring it to your dormitory, but you must be careful of its nature." He left the warning unspoken, and Eno understood. The mirror showed the deepest desires of whoever looked into it. It could inflame immature minds until they became obsessed. "Don't worry, Professor. I know what to do," Eno promised. He had no intention of letting anyone, especially Draco, come near the mirror. A device that magnified wishes could just as easily magnify ambition, and for Slytherins, that danger felt particularly real. Mind and belief were always part of a wizard's power. Influences on those things were hazardous enough. Dumbledore nodded and, without more words, turned toward the storage cabinet against the wall. Eno watched with a private amusement. The headmaster was about to open his stores and offer his guests some sweets. He'd once glimpsed the cabinet's contents before. Alongside a treasured pensieve, there were many glass jars filled with Honeyduke's new candies. While a small candy banquet was being laid out in the headmaster's office, an idle figure wandered the 4th floor of the castle. Pansy had 3 elective classes that term, which left her with a lot of free time. That spare time allowed her to read at leisure and to stroll through the castle when she pleased. Over the Christmas holidays, her Muggle Studies class had even led her to explore London alone, a rare and revelatory experience for her. She'd returned with a stack of Muggle books she'd bought for herself. "Rigid and old-fashioned," she muttered softly as she walked. Ahead, a corridor revealed a room she rarely noticed. Chapter 227, Contents of the Mirror of Erised. Approaching noon, Eno left the principal's office. The conversation had been pleasant, and Dumbledore even seemed reluctant to bring it to an end, but Eno had to go. He had a strict nap schedule and a packed afternoon, Transfiguration class from 3 to 5, and the Transfiguration Club at 7. Without a proper rest, he'd run out of energy, especially for the club meeting. His regular lessons offered little new, and only Professor McGonagall's fortnightly private club gave him useful instruction. Eno admired Hogwarts for that. Small, high-quality lessons of 3 or 4 students with a dean-level professor giving extra teaching. If that existed in the Muggle world, it would cost at least a few £100 a session. Yet McGonagall had kept it up for decades, almost philanthropic in her persistence. He descended the castle stairs slowly. After lunch in the Great Hall, he had ordered Fide to move the Mirror of Erised from the trophy room on the 4th floor to his dormitory. The moment the mirror arrived, he put it in the sanctuary. If it had simply been covered in his dormitory, Draco might not touch it, but hiding it was the safest option to avoid trouble. Eno now understood Dumbledore a little better. He did not like hiding things, but sometimes it was necessary. If you didn't conceal certain things, trouble would inevitably follow. Take the note Lena had slipped him in the library a few days earlier. Dozens of books had gone missing from the restricted section. Where those books had gone was obvious. For all Hogwarts' history, people always spoke of acquiring books, never of losing them. Perhaps the 4 founders had truly understood the importance of knowledge. At 3 o'clock, after his nap, Eno arrived at Transfiguration class on time. He sat in the back row by the window and let his thoughts drift. Professor McGonagall on the podium paid him no mind. If he wanted to space out, she would tolerate it so long as it didn't affect others. She knew his transfiguration level well. Attending the regular lesson was almost unnecessary for him. Transfiguring a clock is no longer difficult for many of you, she said, but today I want you to transfigure a clock that keeps accurate time for at least an hour. Place it on your desk when you're done. We will check before class ends. If any clock shows an error, then I'm afraid every minute of error will add an inch to your homework. She looked around the room and saw crestfallen faces. 3rd years, 3 whole years, and they still reacted like this to a practical task. More than anger, she felt frustration. Hannah Abbott, she snapped, grabbing a prime example. Since the start of class, Hannah had been copying Eno's vacant stare exactly, and while Eno spaced out from boredom, Hannah's were the kind of blankness McGonagall couldn't tolerate. Miss Abbott, you start. Wave your wand and transfigure an alarm clock now, immediately. Hannah's golden pigtails trembled. Called upon, and seeing McGonagall's face, she reluctantly picked up the wand on her desk like someone led to the gallows. Putting her on the spot worked. The class settled into seriousness, and few minds wandered after that. The short hour plus passed quickly. By the end, everyone but 2 had clocks within 5 minutes of the correct time. The 2 unlucky students, Goyle and Hannah, had errors exceeding half an hour and were assigned a 3-foot essay and a retest next class. McGonagall waved her hand, accepting the decent result, and the students left the room in a mixture of laughter and groans. As the class dispersed, McGonagall called, "Eno, wait a moment." He came up to the podium. "There's a newcomer joining the club tonight," she said. "So you'll need to be here by 6:30. The newcomer will need a test to find the hidden classroom." "Don't worry, Professor. I won't mess it up," Eno answered seriously. He not only wouldn't mess it up, he'd been tempted to raise the difficulty a little. After 2 years, a newcomer finally joining the Transfiguration Club was worth savoring. "Don't be troublesome," McGonagall said with mock irritation. "Everyone takes the same test." "All right," Eno shrugged. Missing such rare fun was a small regret, but he accepted it. With about an hour to spare before the club, Eno didn't return to his dorm. He found an empty classroom, shut the door, and vanished from the spot. In the Sanctuary Valley, a magnificent full-length dressing mirror stood, the Mirror of Erised, a key prop from his first year and an indispensable element of Harry's growth in the story. Eno sat quietly opposite it, as he had once faced a boggart, choosing to lower his mental defenses. The 2-meter mirror began to exhale a curling mist like the fine fog on a lake at dawn, easily dispersed by a breeze, but otherwise thick enough to blur vision. After a few seconds, the mirror opened, and through it, Eno saw a vast, beautiful landscape. The evening light was soft, a breeze brushed his face, the lake rippled gently, and the distant woods glowed bluish under the setting sun. In that tranquil scene, a majestic castle stood, towers rising into the sky, windows glowing with warm candlelight as night fell. Through some of the open windows, he could make out lively scenes inside. After a while, the image in the mirror of Erised faded. Eno looked at the empty glass and sighed. It's actually to continue this fairy tale, he thought. It was unexpected, but it made sense. What he truly wanted was to continue the Hogwarts story, to save the castle from the coming darkness, to spare the professors and students who suffered and sacrificed. It was simple, but deeply meaningful. Perhaps, from the moment the owl had delivered that first letter, some of those dreams had already been born. Chapter 228, Snape's Silent Plot, Evening on the third floor of the castle. A desolate corridor no more than 100 meters long, with no classrooms, no professors' offices, and not even a proper common room. A tall figure paced slowly along it, every step careful, as if searching for a clue. Across the castle, the hidden Transfiguration classroom was unusually lively. Which house do you think the new person will be from? Could it be a first year? Cho Chang asked, perched in her trademark hanging basket chair. Cedric Diggory straightened as if on cue. It shouldn't be a first year, he said. I checked around Hufflepuff. There aren't any first years this year who've been singled out by Professor McGonagall. Perhaps, Cho replied breezily, then changed the subject. You really shouldn't pry so much. It's not very gentlemanly. Of course, I won't do it again, Cedric said quickly, looking chastened but pleased. Watching the pair banter, Eno wanted to turn and leave. The sickly sweet smell of Madame Puddifoot's tea shop, she didn't know how it had been opened remotely in Hogwarts, had drifted into the hidden classroom and was making her queasy. Cho, who had finally grown tired of the sweetness, remembered there was someone else in the room who mattered to her. Eno, what do you think? Slytherin? She asked. I think it'll be Gryffindor, Eno said, shaking his head. It wasn't prophecy, just logic. The Gryffindor Dean's Private Transfiguration Club already had 3 students, each from a different house, but conspicuously none from Gryffindor. Under fair circumstances, McGonagall would be eager to add a Gryffindor. On the corridor, Hermione had been pacing for several rounds. She checked the floors, the pillars, the suits of armor, every likely hiding place, yet still couldn't find the hidden classroom McGonagall had hinted at. With only 20 minutes left, she slipped a small half-bottle of Felix Felicis into her hand and felt a twinge of wonder. A few days earlier, she had discovered a precious vial in a discarded display cabinet in the potions classroom. When she'd shown it to Professor Snape, never one to spare praise for Gryffindors, he had inexplicably talked at length how to use and identify Felix Felicis, and, to her amazement, that anything found in the potions storeroom was effectively unclaimed and could be taken. Somehow Hermione had wound up with a whole bottle. She'd tested it, sipping a spoonful before Transfiguration, and her performance had been extraordinary, enough to earn her an invitation to the club. McGonagall didn't pry into how Hermione had improved. She only needed to extend invitations based on classroom performance. But as evening crept on, Hermione grew anxious. A tabby cat crouched in the shadows of the corridor, and the sight of it made her more nervous. When her gaze finally fell on the right painting, McGonagall let out a quiet breath of relief. The invitation had been sent, and she couldn't risk the only Gryffindor failing to find the door. 5 minutes before 7, the door to the hidden classroom opened from the outside. Hermione? Eno stood, surprised. Hermione replied in a slightly nasal voice. Meeting Eno here had been a surprise to her, too. Cho's eyes lit up at the sound. Hermione's tone sounded a little sulky, and Cedric smiled in a knowing way. In here first, transfigure a chair for yourself. Any style you like, Eno explained to Hermione, ignoring the two who had been flirting moments before. Hermione waved her wand and produced a plain, conventional chair. Thank you, she said softly, sitting down. I didn't expect to find you here. Eno introduced the others. This is Cho Chang, a 4th year, and Cedric Diggory, a 5th year. They were all similar in age, and after a quick round of introductions, the group settled easily into a pleasant, relaxed atmosphere. Cedric, in particular, seemed relieved of some small weight and noticeably more cheerful. At 7 o'clock on the dot, Professor McGonagall entered. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stop your chatter. It is time to begin our discussion of Transfiguration," she said, and everyone fell silent. They opened copies of today's Transfiguration that they'd brought with them. Seeing Hermione without a copy, Ino used Geminio to duplicate his own and handed the extra to her. McGonagall nodded approvingly. "Turn to page 165, she said. "Tonight, we will discuss the conversion of material basis and changes of form." No one was surprised. The topic was basic, almost review, but everyone present understood why. Newcomers needed to be assessed fairly. Besides, a basic discussion in Transfiguration was not merely repetition. Like improvising at the piano, fresh inspiration often emerged unexpectedly. After about 15 minutes of reading, McGonagall's gaze settled on Hermione. "Miss Granger," she said, "let us begin with you. Share your thoughts on the transformation of form and material in Transfiguration." Hermione seemed to have expected to be called on. She paused a moment, then began. "Transfiguration is not creation, nor is any transfiguration permanent. The transformation of matter depends on the wizard's understanding of the object being transfigured." Her answer was textbook perfect, flawless. But that perfection only flickered disappointment across McGonagall's face. The student had arrived. Whatever questions lay behind them couldn't be changed now. McGonagall only hoped that the sole Gryffindor in the room would be able to keep pace. Otherwise, the Transfiguration Club would offer Hermione little beyond fair assessment. No knowledge sharing on holidays. Xiaodi wishes everyone a safe and joyful Dragon Boat Festival. Remember to eat zongzi. The Transfiguration Club met in its hidden classroom on the 3rd floor. After Hermione finished answering Professor McGonagall's question, the atmosphere grew quietly charged. Cedric and Cho glanced at each other, both catching a flicker of surprise. It wasn't that Hermione had done poorly. She was, after all, the brightest student in the ordinary class, but her first answer had been unexpectedly conventional compared to the kinds of originality the club prized. Neither Cedric nor Cho was unkind, though, and after a brief exchange, they said nothing. McGonagall, too, allowed herself a small, discreet sigh. She had worried the invitation to Hermione might be seen as unfair. "A standard answer," she allowed, then decisively moved on. "All right, Ino." "Ino," the call sent him setting down the magazine he'd been holding. "Yes, Professor." He stepped forward with his usual calm. "Although the topic is transfiguration of matter and form, I concentrate on elemental transmutation, more precisely, on imparting a kind of spirit or animus to transfigured objects. The idea came from the snowman that greets people in Hogsmeade. Ino had long been fascinated with elemental transfiguration. To him, ice, snow, and fire were foundational. Other magics were often auxiliary. At present, I can kindle a snowman's spirit, but the transfiguration of fire remains rigid and stagnant." He flicked his wand. 2 elemental transformations unfolded at once. A small, lifelike snowman formed on the classroom floor and waved cheerfully at everyone. Beside it, a fiery rune snake wreathed in flame took shape, its 3 heads standing stiff and dumb like antennae, utterly motionless. The contrast was immediate. "As you can see," Ino said, "after elemental transfiguration, the difference between the two is striking. It makes me wonder whether the nature of the matter itself affects the result of transfiguration." He sat down and watched Professor McGonagall, who had to admit she was surprised, partly because Ino had achieved both transfigurations with a single stroke, and partly because they were of such opposing elements. "We'll return to that question," she said, a small look of approval in her face. She turned the discussion over to Cedric and Cho, and they did not disappoint. Each approached the problem from a different angle and contributed ideas that, combined with Ino's, sketched an excellent essay outline. As the 4 answered in turn, it became obvious who still set the standard in the group. Hermione was not foolish. Hearing the 3 distinct responses humbled her into silence for a moment. Then a gentle voice leaned close. "Try again. This time, don't quote the textbooks. Use your own ideas. Incorporate Muggle physics or chemistry if you like. Just don't rely on the old sources." Ino offered the encouragement with as much warmth as he could. He knew how it felt how dangerous it could be for a top student in an ordinary class to arrive at the elite club and find herself behind. Hermione looked up, comforted by his presence. She had an impulsive urge to cling to the person at her side. Professor McGonagall smiled and said, "Miss Granger, let us have your muggle take on matter and form." Cho and Cedric leaned forward, interested. Freed from the pressure of textbook answers, Hermione found her footing. She reorganized her thoughts and began again, this time from another perspective. Time slipped by unnoticed in the suddenly pleasant exchange. An hour and a half passed in a blur. With McGonagall's final summary, the Transfiguration Club's first meeting of the second half of the term drew to a close. In the third-floor corridor, the rhythm had changed. After polite goodbyes, Cedric and Cho fell into step together, hands entwined. The sight made Eno wince inwardly. He couldn't help the thought that if they were so devoted to demonstrative affection, perhaps next meeting they could transfigure a double bed for two. Hermione's expression watching them showed a twinge of envy. They walked the corridor together until it turned. "Curfew in half an hour," Eno said, then turned to Hermione. Her earlier performance had been illuminating. Still not perfect, but she'd adapted to the club's mode of debate in her very first meeting. He said as much. "Are you going back now?" Hermione asked. Before he could reply, she picked up the thread they'd left dangling. "About the elemental transfiguration you did earlier," she said. "You need to think about the nature of fire. Fire emits light and heat. Qualitatively, it's energy, not simply substance. Think of a muggle comparison, like Oldbury Nuclear Power Station." Eno felt the edge of her idea take hold, but he needed clarification. "Do you mean energy dissipation?" "Yes," Hermione agreed. "But not only that. Consider your snowman. He looks lifelike because his energy dissipates slowly. Fire is different. It constantly pours out intense light and heat. Even if magic keeps it burning, that burning is like cells reproducing at a frantic rate. Cells turn over, which doesn't change the essence of a person because that turnover is gradual. But with fire, the being that exists 1 second and the next second is not the same in essence. The energy is moving and changing so fast, the form can't stabilize." She paused, then added, "It needs a core, something that preserves identity despite rapid dissipation." The phrase and its implication clicked for Eno. He pictured a phoenix and the brutal, consuming nature of fiendfire, forms of flame that are different because of what anchors them. The idea of a protective core, an enduring center that keeps a transfigured fire being contiguous through constant flux, unspooled in his mind. "It needs a core protection," he murmured, the image of a phoenix already filling his thoughts, and with it the darker, more terrible essence of fiendfire. Chapter 230, The Double-Sided Mirror That Has Been Sealed for 15 Years. The person involved is confused, while the bystander sees clearly. The saying was never meant to deceive. It simply reflects how differently the same situation can be viewed from different angles. "Thank you, Hermione," Eno said with more gratitude than he might have expected to feel. Looking at the girl who now came up to his shoulder, he no longer thought of her as a child. "It's nothing," Hermione answered lightly, but she turned her head away and avoided meeting his eyes. In that brief glance, she had felt something in the way Eno looked at her, steady, clear, a little intense. The attention made her flustered and self-conscious. Eno didn't dwell on Hermione's reaction. His mind was racing with ideas about transfiguration of fire. If a magically predisposed flame could take on complex forms, the difference between a mere fireball and a runed snake of fire that could act on its own would be enormous. It wouldn't just be a new shape, it would be like having an intelligent combat assistant. And if the magic and heat were strong enough, why would there be only one rune snake? A few minutes of conversation left him feeling as if he'd gained half a year of independent experimenting. A spontaneous sense of joy rose in him. Hermione felt the same. This was a promising beginning. She had decided to devote more time to potions. After all, the excellent results she'd just shown had basically come from that bottle of Felix Felicis. "I wanted to talk about transfiguration," Hermione said after a moment of hesitation. She reached into her robes and pulled out a two-way mirror. "Professor Snape gave this to me before the holidays. I want to give the other one to you so we can communicate about transfiguration more efficiently." A slender, pale hand held a round mirror about 2 inches across. At the name Snape and at the sight of the mirror, Eno felt a weight of history and a strange sense of time slipping. 20 years ago, in the same castle, in the same houses, if a Slytherin and a Gryffindor had truly exchanged mirrors like this, the whole story might have gone in a different direction. All right, when we have time, we'll talk through the mirror. This time, Eno didn't hesitate. He took the two-way mirror and tucked it carefully into his pocket. Discuss through the mirror, Hermione nodded seriously. Then another voice spoke from behind them. While I'd love to pretend I didn't see anything, I should remind you both that curfew is less than a quarter of an hour away. Professor McGonagall covered her forehead with a hand, her tone half exasperated, half resigned. In decades of teaching, she had learned that adolescent feelings couldn't be forbidden, nor were they worth trying to stop. She tolerated mild flirtations among students, so long as they weren't excessive. But these two looked foolish. They knew curfew was coming, and yet stood rooted to the spot. If this corridor wasn't the only route, she wouldn't bother to intervene. Hearing her, Eno turned around immediately. Sorry, Professor. We were just talking about transfiguration and lost track of the time. We'll head back now. Talking about transfiguration? McGonagall's eyelids gave a tiny twitch. She looked almost offended. Late at night, alone with a girl in the corridor, and their excuse was transfiguration. Still, she thought of them as good, promising students. Have you finished your discussion? If so, go back now. Before Eno could answer, Hermione tugged his sleeve. She kept her head down and hurried off toward the moving staircase, as if fleeing. It was 9 o'clock when he got back to the dormitory, just as the weekend was drawing to a close. The day's discoveries left a faint smile on his face. When the dormitory door opened, Draco peered out from behind the curtain. You're back late. Everything all right? Eno smiled. Go get some sleep. Nothing's gonna happen to me. Oh. Draco ducked away. Then his voice called from inside the curtain again after a moment. Eno, do you know any way to make money? Make money? Eno asked, surprised. Malfoy, of all people, should hardly be short of galleons. Yes, make money, Draco pressed. I want to buy a firebolt. Eno suppressed a laugh. A firebolt wasn't some cleanseweep. This would be expensive. 2,500 galleons. How do you plan to earn that? I have shares in my name. Grandfather set them up when I was born. Draco said it as if it were a trivial fact. Shares? Eno arched an eyebrow. Since they're in your name, would you even dare to sell them? Draco went quiet. He neither dared nor could sell them. He couldn't mortgage them either. The pureblood circles were too small and protective. No one would buy Malfoy's shares privately. Watching Draco bury his face like an ostrich, Eno stopped pressing the point and let his mind drift back to money. It was something he'd never really had to think about before, but suddenly it mattered. Research into the Mirror of Erised, attempts to change the wizarding press. None of it would be possible without funds. Money wasn't just convenience. Without it, projects stalled and became dangerous. For the first time, Eno seriously considered ways to earn. He dismissed writing or singing as too Lockhart, hobbies, not careers. But thinking of viable markets brought a discouraging picture. Many trades were dominated by pureblood families. Take wands, for example. A young witch or wizard's first wand purchase usually cost under 10 galleons, but a unicorn tail hair core suitable for wand making could cost as much as 10 galleons on its own. Ollivander didn't run a charity. Wands were a profitable business, likely bolstered in unseen ways, and Ollivander's shop had been the only name since 382 BC. The weathered, flaking sign above the door was both a display of history and a warning. While he was turning possibilities over, Draco offered something that made Eno snort. Eno, let's smuggle. Pfft. Eno almost choked on his laughter. Say that again? Draco, unbothered by his friend's reaction, added casually, I have anonymous shares in a dragon farm. My mother gave them to me. No one knows. Chapter 231. Talking about smuggling in the dormitory, Slytherin dormitory. No one would have expected two third-year wizards' bedtime conversation to be about smuggling. Eno was instinctively against Draco's naive suggestions. While buying food for the Acromantula, he had also learned that smuggling in the British wizarding world was effectively controlled by the Abbott family. Perhaps the leaky cauldron's original purpose was to facilitate information exchange. Don't let old Tom's gap-toothed smile and bald pate fool you. He may be polishing glasses all day, but touch anything that concerns the abbots, and he'll turn hostile in an instant. More than the smuggling itself, Eno worried about something else. Draco, how many shares do you actually have in that dragon farm? Do you have any say, or just the right to dividends? Of course I have a say. Draco sprang out of bed, already picturing it. We'll start small. The Aurors won't be checking 2 students. Once we've made 5,000 galleons, we stop. Then we each get a firebolt. Hold on. Hearing the daydream, Eno couldn't help killing it with a cold splash of reality. Even if you manage to get the dragon in safely, how will you sell it? To whom? Without a sales channel, you'll only be able to offload it cheaply to the shawl peddlers in Nocturne Alley and probably lose money. So what do we do? Draco's shoulders sank. He wasn't stupid. The mention of sales channels made the problem clear. Smuggling wasn't only about getting something past customs, it needed a market. There's definitely a way, Eno said with confidence. It just needs a venue and supporting processing services. Your dragon farm is perfect, and most importantly, it would be legal. Legal? Draco's eyes lit up at the word. Yes, legal and exclusive. Eno repeated the 2 words, legal and monopoly, and Draco could barely sit still. He scrambled out of bed in his pajamas. Tell me, if we can't run it ourselves, we can find investors. Pansy, Daphne, the Blacks. We can do it ourselves. Eno cut him off. I know how to tame acromantula, and their venom is a rare potion ingredient. When Draco had first heard smuggling and dragon farm, he had thought of the acromantula in his box. He'd leave some for Lena, but given how fast acromantula reproduce, that wouldn't make much dent in a supply. Their growth was limited only by food, or rather, by magical meat, and that complemented a dragon farm perfectly. Valuable dragon parts were usually things like blood, hide, heartstrings, liver, even dung, but dragon meat wasn't known to have much market value. Acromantula, however, were communal 5x magical creatures and dangerous for ordinary wizards. A spider colony will finish most people off. Their venom was precious, partly because wizards capable of harvesting it looked down on the work, and those without skill couldn't do it at all. Eno explained the plan in detail. 2 immediate challenges stood out: legal breeding procedures and sales channels. The second was easier. He could contact reputable potion shops through Snape. A high-quality, stable supply would be hard to refuse. The legal breeding procedures would require influence, either from the Malfoy family or more conveniently through Newt or Dumbledore. The earlier mention of 2 firebolts had already given Eno an idea. Promising a broom worth 2,500 galleons each in exchange for effort without initial capital said a lot. After more than 2 hours of discussion, sleep finally overtook them. Go to bed, Eno said. Some things need proper planning. Rome wasn't built in a day. Draco, however, was wired with excitement, cheeks flushed, practically vibrating with the feeling of something big about to happen. Still, he asked cautiously, "Can I tell my father about this?" Eno didn't let the success go to his head and secretly nodded when Draco asked. "Of course, I was going to let Lucius know through you." "All right, I'll write him a letter tomorrow." Draco's tone was slightly disappointed. He was used to deferring to his family, but it didn't dampen his enthusiasm. The next morning, Eno lingered in bed, propped against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. Unlike the original timeline, Draco had chosen 4 electives in his 3rd year, leaving the dormitory emptier than usual. Eno found that the story of his past life had shifted in so many ways that his memories were blurring. Many details faded unless he used a pensieve. What happened in the latter half of the 3rd year, how many subjects Draco chose, too many things were fuzzy. Major events remained clear: the Quidditch World Cup riot, the Triwizard Tournament in the 4th year, Cedric's death, Voldemort's resurrection. So he resolved quietly to prevent those tragedies while he was at Hogwarts. He had a plan. If Barty Crouch Jr. dared appear again, he would be dealt with immediately. This wasn't arrogance, it was the result of time. Powerful figures in the wizarding world seemed few and far between. In his 1st year, Quirrell, possessed as he was, had terrified Eno. Now, only the 4 heads at Hogwarts made him feel any pressure. In times of peace, he had no one to test himself against. Dumbledore had once said his magic was close to Snape's, but that was only a broad comparison. He found himself quietly looking forward to next year, if only to test the waters with Bardi. Xiaodi's sharing today. RIM British Ministry of Magic Classification Level, XXXX. Origin and distribution. RIM are exceedingly rare, giant bovine creatures, typically found in the wilds of North America and the Far East. Appearance. RIM are massive, with gleaming golden hides. Abilities and uses. Anyone who drinks RIM blood will gain a significant increase in strength. RIM blood is extremely difficult to obtain. Supplies are very limited, and it is rarely sold on the open market. Hogwarts lay quiet, time moving like a painting. Sunlight sifted softly through the towers, a faint breeze stirred, and the early spring buds of the humping willow had just begun to appear, year after year, as if retelling the stories of the young wizards. It felt like an exceptionally beautiful dream, intoxicating and not to be broken. 2 months had passed in the blink of an eye. In Shelter Valley, a 15-foot ice troll pulled a plow, while 4 or 5 1-foot-tall ice goblins scattered seed into the furrows. Beneath the valley's olive trees, Eno Swinburne lounged on a transfiguration armchair, watching them at ease. Ugly as they were, the troll and goblins were superb farmhands. With spring approaching, herb cultivation in the valley was indispensable. Over 100 acres, nearly 500,000 square meters, must be tended, and even with magic, it would be a monumental task for one person. So he had made these ice creatures. He transfigured their main bodies and inscribed alchemical formulas blended with ancient runes to produce obedient farming assistants. After watching for a while, Eno turned his attention to the notebook on his lap. Its cover was made from basilisk shed, the pages dense with intricate patterns, the hidden alchemical formulas drawn from the mirror of Ericid, and the two-way mirror, lit by the bronze oil lamp that had once seen through mist. Unlike the Ravenclaw diadem's primitive runic structure, the mirrors revealed alchemical diagrams derived from runes, orderly, teachable knowledge. Ancient runes were fractured, alchemy preserved structure. The so-called lost method for crafting a two-way mirror was simply one lost item among many. Wearing the Ravenclaw diadem and reading both alchemical and Muggle texts in the library, he had been able to deduce the imaging principle. The overall arrangement resembled a Muggle Kozyrev mirror, a large curved surface. Nikolai Kozyrev, a Muggle scientist, had famously proposed that matter and time could be distorted, an idea that chimed uncannily with what the alchemical diagrams implied. Kozyrev even proposed devices to warp time. He died mysteriously the day before completing one experiment, but his curved mirror survived. Struck by the similarity, Eno studied both traditions. Both the alchemical formulas and the Kozyrev mirror organized light along geometric patterns echoing the Fibonacci spiral. In that spiral state, reflected and refracted light could be clearly arranged and combined to form visible images. It was complex, but with predecessor's work as a map, it became manageable. With the diadem's aid, Eno had understood and begun to replicate the imaging alchemy using both wizarding and Muggle knowledge. He considered a second outcome of his last encounter at Horror Park. The boggart had evidently advanced. Where once it had been a thin mist, it now carried a 3-foot circular mirror, hovering freely. From above, the valley was serene and picturesque, the troll plowing, goblins sowing, a young man reading beneath olive trees, a scene out of classical times where magic and farming met. The boggart descended slowly. Eno regarded the mirror in his hand with satisfaction. It was the product of 2 months' work. The alchemical imaging formula, combined with the mirror of Ericid's power to peer into the mind, could display clearly all the scenes the mirror holder had seen over a given period. In effect, it was a camera for the naked eye. If you could look, the mirror would show. It still needed many refinements, but the finished product was groundbreaking. He knew, however, how many coincidences it had taken. The bronze oil lamp that revealed the hidden diagrams, the Ravenclaw diadem, his grasp of alchemy and Muggle science, each indispensable. The imaging alchemy had been lost for a reason. Without the oil lamp, it would have been extremely difficult to reconstruct the complete formula. One could have attempted brute force dismantling, but that demanded countless samples the lost items, by definition, lacked. As March approached, Hogwarts came back to life. Lawn and courtyard shook off winter's gray, tender green spread pleasingly. But people noticed something odd. For 2 days straight, Slytherin's star student, Eno Swinburne, was seen carrying a mirror everywhere: the Great Hall, the Astronomy Tower, portraited corridors, the library, the Black Lake, even Hagrid's hut. By the second day, rumor had turned to gossip. That evening, after a panoramic capture of the castle at sunset, Eno returned alone to the Slytherin common room. The usual hum was gone. An eerie silence met him. "Are you all right? They've been saying you're cursed," Draco said with more concern than Eno expected. What had begun as curiosity on day 1 had by day 2 become idle rumor. "I'm fine, thank you," Eno replied, looking around at the worried faces. Draco, Pansy, Daphne, Goyle, Flint. Slytherins weren't cold, they were simply selective about friendships. "Since everyone's so curious, let me show you what I've been doing for the last 2 days, he added. He waved his wand. A 5-foot ice stand rose from the floor, and he leaned the mirror against it. After a heartbeat, the empty glass filled with images and a soft, soothing music began to play. "It's the Astronomy Tower," someone cried out, but a hush fell over the room as the scene continued, unnecessary words disappearing like ripples on water. Chapter 233, Slytherin Movie Show. The Slytherin common room was packed. The vast chamber hummed with the restless energy of young wizards pressed close to one another, eyes fixed on a mirror set up at the front, 3 feet across, nearly a meter, but still too small for the crowd. The first rows had to half squat or sit on the floor. Eno had placed the mirror and then moved away, sitting quietly on a sofa in the back corner. Watching the scene, an impromptu open-air cinema, made him sigh at how isolated the wizarding world had become, at its lack of simple entertainments. This spectacle was really a Slytherin thing. In another house, it probably wouldn't have caused such a stir. The mirror was essentially a kind of magical television, and to students from Muggle families that novelty might not seem overwhelming. But Slytherin, full of pure blood and half-blood families who loved novelty and social curiosities, took to it instantly. With soft music underscoring the images, everyone sat in attentive silence. The footage showed familiar sights, yet it still captivated the audience. Whenever a fleeting figure appeared on the screen, there was a ripple of admiration. Those who recognized themselves in the film couldn't help lifting their heads a little higher, pleased and proud. It was a lively, cheerful scene, but Eno felt distinctly alone. The feeling prickled at him the way it used to when well-dressed gentlemen visited the orphanage at Christmas. The children would go from despondent to ecstatic over a piece of candy, a new toy, or a flashing novelty hat. Slytherin's excitement felt similarly small and picturesque, and Eno, sitting apart, suddenly saw it from the other side. A polite voice near him broke his thoughts. "Mr. Swinburne, may we have a word?" Flint, 18, repeating a year, had seen an opportunity and wasted no time. He'd sneaked up close with a surprisingly low voice for a 6'3" giant. Seeing Flint's shrewd expression, Eno remembered their dealings last summer. He listened, then shook his head gently. "You can be involved," Eno said, "but not alone. Something like this will meet resistance when we try to promote it. One family's strength isn't enough." Flint's face fell for a moment, then he shaded it with a more reasonable tone. "Then we expand slowly. We build, step by step. Soon the whole British Isles will be our market." The British Isles? Eno's soft laugh held no scorn. Flint had been quick to see an opening, and his foresight was useful, but limited. "Mr. Flint, we can't stop at England. A disruptive innovation sweeps an era, not just a country. This can't be achieved by the Flint family alone. We need all of Slytherin." The phrase "sweep an era" made Flint stare. Global promotion was a daunting idea, and opening the project to more people reduced the short-term profit. "That won't make us much money," he protested. "I'm not thinking about immediate profit," Eno replied. "The real gains come from the chain of benefits once the equipment becomes widespread." He didn't go into details. Everything was still premature. The mirror had to work as reliably as a Muggle television before it could transform anything. For now, it was an entertainment novelty confined largely to Slytherin. 2 days later, the recorded content ran to about an hour. The final shot on the mirror lingered. The castle, majestic, bathed in the orange glow of a setting sun. The screening ended, and many younger students sighed in disappointment. To give them more, Eno replayed the footage. This time, more of the older students focused on him. "Eno, you're a friend of the Malfoys," Draco said first, sweeping his gaze over those around him. Only a third year, Draco met the crowd without a tremor, an unspoken challenge. Pansy, Daphne, and the handful who'd studied history of magic together clustered with him. The scene grew tense. Even without words, factions formed. Those in the front rows shifted, choosing sides by subtle gestures and glances. Flint, who'd tried to act as the house's guardian brother, stepped forward. "What's this, then? Are you lot going to start fighting? Tomorrow, the other houses will be laughing at us." He looked at the two groups, baffled. How had what was meant as friendly cooperation become a confrontation? No one initially meant anything but collaboration, but allegiances are contagious. Malfoy's presence drew the third years to his side, and not wanting to be the first to back down, others stiffened in response. The common room's air grew tight. From his sofa, Eno spoke slowly, letting the familiar cadence settle the room. "We come from the mire. We crave power. We are full of ambition. We are calm and resolute, elegant in our bearing. We regret nothing. We are Slytherin." He paused, then added with a sharp little smile, "And today I saw courage from Gryffindor. That's good. It means we've made progress." The small joke eased the tension. What had looked like a brewing fight dissolved into a misunderstanding. Eno continued more practically. Things still needed polishing, but every one of them, past or present, was eligible to be involved. "We are," he paused deliberately. "We are Slytherin." Flint answered first, then prompted by him, everyone else chimed in together. The single word dissolved the last traces of conflict. But as the echo of that shout faded, many of those gathered found their eyes returning to one solitary figure. The person who had sat on the sofa from the start and had quietly watched the whole time. Chapter 234, Order of Merlin. Time passed slowly. 3 days slipped by, and after the last confrontation, Slytherin had somehow become unusually united. It was as if, whatever corner someone was pushed into, someone else would always speak up. In the Slytherin third-year girls' dormitory, Pansy sat with a 1-inch thick copy of Das Kapital in her lap, half asking, half thinking aloud. "Do you think leaders are born?" she mused. Daphne watched her, helpless. She'd noticed the change in Slytherin, and she knew what had caused it. A single person, and only a few words. "I don't know what mad idea you're cooking up now," she said. "But I do know one thing. What Eno has been doing isn't accidental. From the first time he told a story, from the first time he appeared in the paper, even on the train when Dementors surrounded us, he was the first to step forward." The mention of Dementors made Daphne pause, as if the memory scraped at something raw. She went on more slowly. "Eno's reputation didn't happen overnight. It grew bit by bit. I don't know what you've been through, Pansy, but please, don't try to copy anyone's path. We can be ambitious, but we're not daft." Daphne glanced at her roommate with concern. Since the end of the Christmas holidays, Pansy had seemed different, older, as if she'd grown up overnight. "Your worrying is unnecessary," Pansy replied with a bright smile. She knew she had changed, and she didn't think it was a bad thing. Even though the mirror in the fourth-floor trophy room was gone, the image it had shown her was still vivid in her mind. That mirror had seemed to open a new window for her. What she'd seen in it had intoxicated her. At the same time, in the Great Hall, Draco Malfoy paced up and down behind Crabbe and Goyle, every inch of him enjoying the look of importance. He wasn't really searching the hall for geomantic treasure spots. He was simply choosing the most conspicuous place to display the second mirror. The dull landscapes of the first mirror had been replaced by something far more entertaining. The second mirror showed a short film set in a snowy valley, starring magical animals made of ice, a bumbling troll, and a clever goblin. In the few dozen minutes it ran, it was one gag after another. The foolish troll Tom and the sly goblin Jerry kept performing outrageous antics, and Draco was already eager to see more. Still, he hadn't forgotten his immediate task, putting the mirror in a prominent place where everyone could see Slytherin's achievement. This was supposed to be Goyle's job, but Malfoy had taken it. None of that mattered now. He'd already spotted the scarred boy and his red-haired sidekick at the Gryffindor table. "Goyle, come with me. We're going to see Scarhead. Crabbe, keep the mirror steady. If you break it, you're finished," Draco commanded, then strode toward the Gryffindor table with a swagger. Harry glanced up without thinking and saw the trio approaching. Malfoy, what do you want now? Ron snapped, standing up to block him. Want? Draco sneered at the red-haired boy. I'm here to open your eyes, so you won't be ignorant your whole life, you Weasley popper. The insult landed like a splinter. Before Ron could answer, Ginny rose as well. Our family may be poor, she said coldly, but we don't need your lectures, you pathetic Malfoy. George and Fred immediately fell into place at Ginny's sides, ready for a fight. Crabbe, who had been playing the part of the dim-witted lackey, suddenly surprised everyone by explaining in a dry, deliberate voice, it's an alchemy item made by Mr. Swinburne. He calls it a film mirror. You can watch entertaining scenes in it. Eno? George and Fred exchanged a look and lowered their guards. Certain names in the wizarding world carried a kind of power. They drew in anyone hoping for a spectacle. The Gryffindors leaned forward, and soon Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were crowding around. The Hufflepuffs, seeing Cedric's image appear in the first mirror earlier, surged forward with particularly eager enthusiasm, each acting as if they had the strongest backing in the room. As the crowd pressed closer, Draco cleared his throat with exaggerated dignity. What I'm about to show you is the greatest alchemical item of this century. Ron made a muffled noise of contempt, but instead of leaving, he shoved forward until he had a better view. Draco pulled the velvet cloth away. Crabbe had propped the 3-foot mirror on the Great Hall table, and a hush fell. The Great Hall filled with laughter. The magically altered Tom and Jerry film not only delighted the students, it made Dumbledore chuckle in his office on the 8th floor. The portraits of former heads were roaring with laughter as the scenes in the mirror flashed by. 20 minutes of non-stop comedy sped past, and when the image faded, Dumbledore took off his glasses to wipe tears from his eyes. Truly wonderful, unbelievable, he said, still dabbling at the corners of his eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd seen. He understood now why Eno had wanted the Mirror of Erices the way he had. What surprised him even more was how much Eno had achieved in just over 2 months. Eno, Dumbledore said, turning to the young man who had been summoned, you've surprised me again. This alchemical talent, perhaps you should meet someone. You mean Mr. Flamel? Eno asked, genuinely startled. I thought the Philosopher's Stone was destroyed. I assumed he was gone. The stone was destroyed, Dumbledore conceded, but a true master of alchemy does not vanish so easily. Nicholas Flamel was prepared to embrace whatever fate came, but it does not mean his mind and experience are spent. He smiled, then added, and before anything else, this is newsworthy. Wizards have needed this kind of innovation for a long time. I shall recommend you for the Order of Merlin, 2nd class. Eno's eyes widened. The film mirror, Professor? Yes, the film mirror. We have to change how wizards think. Communication can't keep relying on old-fashioned letters. We need to broaden our horizons. Broaden their horizons, Dumbledore repeated, tasting the words carefully. Then, slowly, he nodded. Chaudy's contribution for today, Hippocampus, British Ministry of Magic, classification level XXX. Origin and distribution. The hippocampus is a large creature native to Greece and often seen in the Mediterranean Sea. Appearance. The hippocampus has the head and forequarters of a horse and the tail and hindquarters of a fish. Its eggs are very large and translucent. The tiny young can be seen swimming within the eggs. 8th floor of the castle, in the most private room at Hogwarts. When Dumbledore nodded, Eno let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He had been half afraid the old headmaster would think differently. An orphan, a Slytherin, a brilliant student who'd gathered others for private lessons in his 2nd year. With all those dark marks against him, anyone in Dumbledore's position would at least be cautious. There was precedent, yet Dumbledore's trust, almost blind, inscrutable trust, surprised him. Eno wasn't Harry. His path wasn't so simply black and white. Professor, don't you want to say anything else? He asked. Say what? Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. Oh, shall I prod you to hurry up and make episode 2 of Tom and Jerry? In that case, fine. Eno looked away, speechless. The old headmaster was playing coy, and there was nothing to do but let it be. Dumbledore laughed, warm and amused. Ha ha! Don't be cross. What do you want me to say? I'm only an old man. Perhaps I should have stepped down long ago, just like in that book you wrote. He tapped a finger, and a light blue book flew from the shelf and opened itself as it hovered toward Eno. It landed open on a page about thunder sword, bitter wheel. A proverb under the equipment read, "The brighter the light, the shorter the life." Seeing that line, Eno understood something of Dumbledore's thinking. Perhaps the legendary white-haired wizard, active for a century, was weary. He understood. Yet some things simply couldn't be done without Dumbledore. Take Tom, for example. Even now, when the opponent was almost playing with an open hand, if the hand was a masterful one, it was hard for anyone to win despite the openness. Voldemort's known Horcruxes could be neutralized, but the variable that remained was Nagini. A few days earlier, when Eno had been uncertain about the original story, he had spent half a day reworking the timeline, but despite all his calculations, one Horcrux was still unaccounted for, and by the events in the original timeline, Nagini had not yet become a Horcrux. Missing one felt like missing them all. For a wizard like Voldemort, even a single useful Horcrux could be decisive. If you had the means to contain him, the number didn't matter. If you didn't, even an un-Horcruxed Voldemort was terrifying. That was what had happened 14 years ago. Sitting in the headmaster's office, Eno's mind wandered until he had slipped into Dumbledore's shoes. An unknown seventh Horcrux, one possibly hidden in the castle itself. Those problems were a stubborn splinter. They could not be simply cut away. Dumbledore did not break the silence. He studied the Mirror of Erised with a faint, amused interest. Even at 100 years old, he would sometimes wear a boyish smile. As his gaze shifted between the portraits of past headmasters and the mirror, the corners of his mouth curved noticeably. Eno noticed. "Professor, I've always wondered, can Tom really do whatever he pleases? Just because he's powerful? Aren't there other magical creatures comparable to the Valley Trolls?" he blurted, 3 questions tumbling out at once. Dumbledore paused, then smiled without answering directly. "Eno, there's one thing you should know. No one can do absolutely anything they want. Not a troll, not a dragon, not even a phoenix. So trolls aren't the worst thing to worry about." He let that settle, his half-moon spectacles catching the light as if recalling something. History of magic has always been your strength. You know better than most that far worse things have appeared, Dementors, for example, that leave people helpless. But what came of that? Eno thought of the Patronus charm. Creatures and powers that seemed to take everything had somehow given rise to defenses. When Voldemort reached a certain point of madness, prophecies and the boy who lived appeared. It felt as though there was an invisible balance. Within a range one could push, but if you stepped past a boundary, something would leap in to stop you. It was not just idle speculation. Besides Harry and Voldemort, the Great Fire in Paris had drawn even Nicholas Flamel, recluse of centuries, out to intervene. Walking back through the corridors, mirror tucked under his arm, Eno let these thoughts float away. The castle itself reminded him that magic had a way of producing counterweights, that extremes tended to birth their opposites. But he also reminded himself that he was a student and should enjoy being one. Overthinking now only added needless worry. He wasn't lonely on the walk. Many younger students lingered in the halls whenever the mirror was out. They would turn, strike what they thought an elegant pose, walk past casually, then glance back and smile. Most of them were first or second years, and mostly girls. The harmless vanity and excitement made him smile too, and it eased the restlessness he'd felt. By the time he reached the dungeons, past the right-angle turn into Slytherin territory, the chatter grew quieter. The left side of the stair always marked Hufflepuff's domain. Both houses respected that dividing line. After giving the password, Eno stepped into the common room. The little chamber looked like a Muggle arcade tonight. Young students clustered around the mirror, endlessly rewatching the same things. Maybe I could make something, he thought. He realized, however, that pulling off a lasting film project alone would be hard. A modified Tom and Jerry would be amusing for a while, but wouldn't have staying power, and he didn't have the energy to bury himself in production full-time. His eyes landed on Draco, talking loudly nearby. That roommate, sometimes clever, sometimes childish, fond of showing off, would probably jump at the chance to be Hogwarts head director. Chapter 236, A Letter 2 Months Late Night. After finishing his projection work in the common room, Draco slogged back to the dormitory, carrying the mirror. He had always disapproved of Eno's casual attitude toward it. How could something as valuable as an alchemical mirror be left in the Great Hall, left in the common room for anyone to touch? If it were damaged, they'd never find the culprit. From the start, he'd noticed that the Weasley redheads were fascinated by the mirror. Not only Scarhead's gang, but the two fifth-year twins as well. That made him even more uneasy. So Draco didn't just move the mirror in and out himself every day. He had Goyle and Crabbe take turns standing guard. Eno was carefree and didn't worry about such things, but as a friend, Draco felt it was his duty. Tonight, however, something felt different. After he set the mirror down in the dormitory, he caught Eno looking at him with bright, eager eyes. "Is something wrong?" Eno asked. "I brought the mirror in from the Great Hall half an hour early today. Not many people have been guarding it lately." Draco's gaze flicked away. "Nothing's wrong. It's just, I've noticed you're very good with these." He trailed off, searching for the right adjective. Eno hesitated, then brightened. "I like to display Slytherin's glory." "That's perfect," Draco supplied, approving. The idea of showing off Slytherin prestige was somehow exactly right. "Draco, there's something even more glorious to display now. Interested?" "What, for example?" Draco asked coolly, though his eyes betrayed him. Eno did his best to explain filmmaking in simple terms a wizard could understand, replacing Tom and Jerry with real people, the director's job, camera angles, lighting, set design. The deeper he went, the more a light came on in Draco's face, as if he were rediscovering himself and finding a mission. Afterward, Draco stayed. He became Eno's Malfoy brand sidekick, who always carried a sketchbook, asking constantly, what angle, what lighting, what backdrop? At first, Eno could bluff his way through, but as Draco's questions grew more technical, he found himself a little overwhelmed. He'd thought life would continue in that interesting, ordinary way, but a sudden letter disrupted their routine. "Eno, what did my father say?" Draco asked, curious. Eno set the letter down in plain view and didn't hide its contents. After more than 2 months of planning and paperwork, Lucius Malfoy had finally finished the legal procedures. The project was going ahead, a dragon farm on Brioni, an island cluster off the coast of Croatia. To Muggle maps, there were 14 Brioni Isles. On the Wizarding maps, there were always 15. The 15th was the dragon farm, hidden and protected by a Muggle-repelling charm. Draco looked oddly uninterested. He had new pursuits now. The firebolt he had once craved didn't seem so important anymore. "How long will you be gone?" "I haven't even learned scene transitions yet," he said with a touch of reluctance. "A month, maybe several months. I'll try to be quick," Eno answered after a long hesitation. He truly didn't know how long he would have to stay. This would be the world's first Acromantula breeding farm. Many unknowns remained. The right breeding environment, safe procedures for venom collection, sensible feeding routines. Only when everything was working could he relax and wait for dividends. He might have to be away for a while. Draco surprised him. "Why don't we give up? Let's just focus on filming. No need to waste time on this." Give up? Eno actually wanted to record that and show Lucius how persuasive his son could be. "Do you know how much effort your father put into this? This isn't just a permit from the Croatian Ministry of Magic. Creating a whole new industry will attract a lot of hungry eyes." Draco looked away, a little guilty. Eno, faced with the boy's sudden flightiness, softened and said the words he felt necessary. Draco was nearly 15. In another age, he would already be starting a family. "If possible, don't give up so easily. It's all right to say things like that in the dormitory, but if Uncle Lucius heard you, he'd be very disappointed." He spoke earnestly, then changed the subject to something lighter. "For filming, I'll leave 2 new mirrors. Use them as much as you like." A mix of admonition and reward always worked. Draco brightened again. "Leave it to me. You'll see an interesting story when you get back." "I won't give up on the Acromantula either. I'll spend part of the summer there. After all, it's our business." Draco's confidence returned. Eno smiled and nodded at the boy's vitality. He didn't notice how much his own behavior had shifted toward something Dumbledore-like, a genuine satisfaction at watching others grow. The first weekend after Lucius's letter, Eno arrived in Hogsmeade early and opened his family's one-way fireplace. He settled on the living room sofa and waited. Everything had gone so smoothly thanks to the dean's steady green light. He still remembered Snape's expression when he came to the office to ask for leave. Initial silence, then, upon hearing it was for a business venture, an uncharacteristic assent, and a short lecture on the value of money in family life. It had felt, in a way, like a small character change, and Eno felt grateful. As Dean of Slytherin, Snape could easily have refused. It wasn't a strictly legitimate reason for leave. But Snape had not only agreed, he'd even offered to help if needed. "I feel like I'll owe more and more favors," Eno muttered to himself, watching the orange flames of the fireplace and thinking about how to repay the debt. Chapter 237, The Ultimate Fear Between Life and Death. Croatia, Brioni Island. After the official breakup of Yugoslavia in 1992, several republics, Croatia, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia, declared independence. Brioni Island became famous in international politics because Josip Broz Tito, the former Yugoslav prime minister, spent his later years there. That, of course, was Brioni from a Muggle point of view. About 120 nautical miles from the main island lay another, much larger and secluded isle. Ancient trees rose like pillars. The ground was carpeted with green grass, giving the place the feel of a primeval forest. On the island's edge, a blue halo flashed and vanished. Two figures appeared out of nothing. "Mr. Malfoy, you really didn't have to come," Eno said, looking at Lucius, who still seemed a little shaken. Fidget had frightened him. This trip should have been done with a port key, but for some reason Lucius had insisted on not arranging one, arguing that with a phoenix there was no need. Whether it was some long-held belief or a stubbornness of habit, Eno had tried to explain that Fide wasn't convenient for carrying passengers. It made no difference. Lucius seemed particularly easily rattled. Fide had only given him a curious look, and Lucius had completely lost his composure, too timid even to meet eyes. Eno had expected to be alone on this trip, but after a short rest, Lucius recovered his nerve and insisted on coming along. He spoke confidently until he took hold of Fide's tail feather and immediately regretted it. The phoenix's cold, black eyes and the resentful magic that rippled around it reminded Lucius of a similarly cold ruthlessness from 15 years ago. Fortunately, that was all in the past. They stood by the shore for a moment. Lucius struggled to his feet and forced a smile. "I'm fine. I'm much better now. You're Draco's friend. I can't let you handle this by yourself." "Mark Manifest." Lucius drew his wand. Orange letters coalesced into a complex sigil and rose into the sky. "Draco is fortunate to have a father like you," Eno said quietly. "People have many flaws, but even those with many faults can have qualities worth admiring. Lucius's concern for his family was one of them." Above the shore, Eno looked up and saw several figures on broomsticks. Minutes later, they descended, and three burly men approached. The middle-aged man leading them smiled broadly from across the grass. "Esteemed Mr. Malfoy, it's been ages since we had a visit like this. You have no idea how pleased I was to receive your letter." "Long time no see, Daron," Lucius replied calmly. "This is Mr. Swinburne, the Malfoy's good friend," he added by way of introduction. "The second wizard in the wizarding world to own a private phoenix and a best-selling author." Daron greeted enthusiastically. Some people were born for social ease, others were born for hard work. Then there were those rare few who combined both, smooth in conversation and effective in action. After only a few minutes, Eno mentally marked the Dragon Farm manager high, an 85 in his book. Daron was not just affable. He knew every operational detail of the Dragon Farm, from profitability to the habits and breeding of various dragon species, and even the dispositions of the staff. "Daron, let's go inspect the site," Eno said once pleasantries were over. "Of course, Mr. Swinburne," Daron answered, then glanced meaningfully at Lucius. He hadn't forgotten that this farm belonged to a Malfoy. They mounted brooms and flew inland. The island's size became apparent on the way, broader than it had seemed from the shore. After about 10 minutes, they reached the center, an open plaza ringed with iron railings and enclosures. Daron landed and gestured toward the fences. "These are the measures I put in after researching acromantula behavior from your letter," he said modestly. Eno smiled without committing. Iron fences alone wouldn't be sufficient. If acromantulas were so easy to contain, their venom wouldn't be so valuable. Lucius, sensing hesitation, asked softly, "Is something wrong?" It's not that it's wrong, Eno said, but some things could be improved. He fell silent and then looked at a huge enclosed structure nearby, a chamber at least 10 meters tall. What is that for? Diron answered cautiously. It's a dragon blood collection site. Sometimes aged dragons are slaughtered there. Blood collection and slaughter. Eno shook his head. Let's go to the southern jungle first. That's the most suitable habitat for acromantulas. They angled toward the southern side of the island. Darren, eager to make a good impression after his tone, hurried ahead to lead them. As the group's attention shifted, Eno pressed his forehead with his fingers, unseen by the others. The dark, viscous shadow at his feet, the residue of something like thick ink, was shrinking. He had felt it most strongly when they passed the dragon blood chamber. A surge of extreme pleasure and a near loss of control. It was the feedback a boggart sent back after it had absorbed enough fear. Once he knew the purpose of that building, the source of the fear became obvious. Dragons. Dragons, as powerful magical creatures, were almost certainly more terrifying than acromantulas. Facing the terror of life and death, the emotional charge in that instant nearly allowed the hidden boggart to break free. This was dangerous. A boggart saturated with the emotions of life and death, if it detonated, would envelop everyone nearby in paralyzing dread. Fainting might be the best outcome. If Eno hadn't acted swiftly and forced the creature back into the shadow beneath his feet, they could have ended up with people in St. Mungo's by the hour. He forced the boggart to merge again into the dark residue, narrowly averting a disaster. Xiao Di's share today, Romanian longhorn origin and distribution. The Romanian longhorn is a dragon species native to Romania. Romania has become the world's major dragon reserve, where wizards come from many countries to study dragons up close. Appearance: deep green scales and long, glittering golden horns. Habits: they gore prey with their horns and then roast it with their fire. Abilities and uses: fire breathing. Chapter 238, Dragon Farm Changes. Perhaps only in a truly peaceful place can one feel time stretching out, each moment slow enough to be savored. Brioni Island in early May was lush under the noon sun. In the center of the island, the dragon farm, really a dragon processing plant, occasionally echoed with shrill roars. Next to it stood a small house of ice and snow. It wasn't large, barely 10 square meters, and its simple 45-degree triangular roof gave it an elegant, almost oriental look. After lunch, Eno sat quietly by the door. A residual wave of fear from the processing plant made him close his eyes for a moment. He'd been on Brioni Island for almost 2 months. The acromantula had been settled in the dense forest on the island's southern side, and things were moving in the right direction. The acromantula, gregarious and strictly hierarchical, had quickly adapted under the leadership of the first-generation adult spiders. Food and supplies were provided regularly. All the farm asked in return were 2 venom collections a year from the young spiders. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Still, Eno wasn't in any hurry to leave. The changes in the boggart over that period had fascinated him. After a string of coincidences, the current boggart seemed almost like a different creature from the original. Its shape and color had changed, but more importantly, it had become a bottomless pit for fear. A creature that could swallow any amount of terror. What had once condensed to the size of an inkblot had now bulged to over 100 times its original size. The afternoon was tranquil and pleasant, but anyone experienced with the sea knows how quickly the ocean's weather can turn. More than 100 nautical miles away, a bank of dark storm clouds rolled in. Within minutes, they swallowed the island. The sky blackened, and the small island, which had been at midday, seemed to fall into night. Eno looked up. Faced with such raw power, every living thing felt a certain awe. Lightning flickered in the cloud mass, and a strong sea wind whipped across the island. It felt apocalyptic. "I wonder if Lucius will pay double for working in this," Eno muttered, half joking, glancing at the tall dragon processing plant next door. The fear that had been vibrating through the building had faded from his senses until then. Thunder and wind masked the dragon's roars. Then the familiar fear was replaced by a new alarm. Boom! The massive wooden doors of the processing plant were blown inward with a violent crash. A dozen figures stumbled out, terrified. "Mr. Swinburne, get out of here quickly! The dragons are out of control!" Darren shouted, wand waving frantically. The roof was torn open, and 5 Romanian longhorns burst free, spraying flames into the sky as if celebrating their escape. Against the dark clouds, their silhouettes were stark and menacing. The farm staff were not ordinary people. The dozen handlers reacted quickly. Unrestricted by terrain, they formed teams of 3, mounted their brooms, and set to contain the runaway dragons. These were old dragons, probably scheduled for slaughter. Their stamina and fire were far below that of mature specimens. Exhausted by their sudden break for freedom, they soon waned. Within minutes, the handlers had the situation under control. Re-imprisonment was only a matter of time. Duran, the dragon farm's manager, eased his broom down as the immediate danger passed. "I'm very sorry, sir. This is my responsibility," he said, voice heavy but sincere. Ino asked calmly, "Why did they break loose? You don't get an event like this very often." "It was Commons. He betrayed us." Darren's voice still trembled. "He destroyed the chains, then ran during the chaos, probably because—" He stopped, as if afraid to finish. "Because our spider farm is finally running smoothly," Ino supplied. "Wealth and success breeds envy. A thriving dragon farm would attract competition, and in Croatia, the Malfoy name didn't carry the weight it did elsewhere. Sabotage out of jealousy was a simple, ugly motive." Hearing the rest of the sentence, Darren visibly relaxed. He couldn't openly shirk blame as the man in charge, but if someone could confirm the motive, it would help. Then Eno's voice went cold. "If Commons chose to betray you, would he have only released these 5 old Romanian longhorns, or did he simply underestimate your strength?" Darren followed his gaze to the northwest horizon. Even beneath the black clouds, a large shadow moving in the sky was unmistakable. "Mr. Swinburne, fly east on your broom, ignore the international statute of wizarding secrecy, and get into inland Croatia," Darren called. At that moment, he had given up on saving himself. He knew the young man's identity well. No matter how many workers were hurt, Malfoy would pay restitution. But if this young man died here, none of them would ever live in peace. As the person responsible for the farm, Darren could flee like the others, but the consequences of staying would fall on him first. Eno glanced at the broom offered to him, but didn't take it. "Darren, get them out of here. This isn't just about 5 old Romanian longhorns," he said. "You must leave." Darren's voice was firm. They had just placed an order last month for 12 Ukrainian ironbellies to meet the Acromantula's needs. The Ukrainian ironbelly was the largest known dragon. Its power was unquestionable. "I have a phoenix. I can leave whenever I want," Eno said, more to himself than to anyone else. He wasn't planning to run. The spider farm had finally taken root, and he wouldn't let it be destroyed on his watch. He also didn't believe those 12 ironbellies were the end of the threat. At the mention of a phoenix, Darren seemed bolstered. Without another word, he mounted his broom, gathered the handlers, and began to evacuate them into the storm-blackened sky. Above Brioni Island, the dragon trainers once again showed what it meant to be a wizard. After Darren joined the fight, the 15 dragon trainers stopped worrying about casualties. Raw, powerful magic erupted continuously. Within moments, the 5 Romanian longhorns in the sky lost the ability to fly. They fell into formation and made for the Croatian interior to the east. Only there could they hope to find help quickly. Before leaving, Darren glanced down once more. Seeing the dark blue phoenix calmed him completely. Then, without looking back, he propelled his broom and swept away. "I knew it wouldn't be that simple." Eno stroked Fide's wings gently. The thoughts pressed into his mind made it clear. Besides the 12 Ukrainian ironbellies, 23 adult wizards were concealed around the island. There was no intention of leaving an escape route for Dragon Farm. "We'll have to work for this," he murmured, patting Fide's back again to encourage him. Since the others left no opening, Eno stopped being polite. He reached for the power of the boggart, and ink-black mist rose like a tide from the ground. His body floated up through the choking darkness as the wind drew it skyward. Ahead, the massive shapes of the Ukrainian ironbellies loomed. Each nearly 80 feet long, they radiated oppression even alone. 12 of them together were a nightmare. Still, Eno had a plan. He gripped the elder wand and centered himself, letting his emotions go remarkably still. A clear, cold voice rang from above. "Misty Veil. Winter is coming." The island clouded over as if before a downpour. Then the world seemed to be wrapped in a thick white shroud. Snow fell like dancing butterflies, and a violent gale tore across the island, alive, roaring, howling, sweeping everything aside. Ancient trees bent and swayed like helpless reeds. Mist crept in, first thin and white, then deepening until it was an ink-like fog, a prehistoric beast that swallowed the island whole. Chirp! A long, ethereal cry echoed out. It was Fide's first vocalization in this world, a fledgling's first wail. The sound was otherworldly, yet full of malice and curse. Even Inno, prepared as he was, felt a wave of despair wash over him. If he was shaken, how much more terrifying must it be for the island's other creatures? The bone-deep cold of the blizzard, the pervasive dread of the boggart, and the phoenix's despairing cry together struck like a dementor's kiss. Under that weight, the 12 Ukrainian ironbellies and the 23 guarding wizards all seemed to collapse, twitching on the ground. Bloodline magic. Eno watched the island like a natural disaster and understood why Voldemort had been willing to abandon his looks. Magical power is a direct measure of strength, but it does not encompass everything a wizard can be. He had power comparable to Snape's, but facing 12 dragons and 23 adult wizards, capturing them alive while keeping the dragons alive would have demanded more than raw power alone. The cost had been the acromantulas and the island's dense undergrowth, but the decisive factor was a rare combination of bloodline magic: the White Witch's ice and snow, the terrifying boggart, and the despair-bending cry of a phoenix. While Eno sized up how to handle those wizards, things were stirring far away at Hogwarts. Draco had generously replaced the enchanted mirror in the Great Hall with a looping Tom and Jerry reel from 5 to 8 in the evening. The head's office, meanwhile, buzzed with activity. Fudge had rushed over the moment Dumbledore's letter reached him. A third-class Order of Merlin medal didn't usually warrant such fuss, but Fudge treated it like a major event, especially with Malfoy, Flint, Parkinson, Greengrass in play. In short, Slytherin's new generation was rallying. Fudge, ever the politician, saw opportunity. This mirror, this moment, could unite those pureblood families into a force that would matter once these students graduated. He loved a clever opening, and Dumbledore's letter gave him one. The thought had put him in high spirits all afternoon. An excellent piece of alchemy, Fudge declared as the image in the mirror faded. Among his entourage, Umbridge was the first to react. In such an excellent era, outstanding students naturally emerge, no small credit to Hogwarts' fine education. As always, Umbridge distributed her flattery with contrived sweetness to the minister, the students, the professors. No one spared. Even Fudge, used to flattery, allowed a small smile at the praise. "I believe this achievement is more than sufficient to justify a third-class Order of Merlin," he said. "I will sign my name in the recommender column." Decision made, the matter was put to rest. Elsewhere, on the Quidditch practice pitch outside the castle, a different scene played out. Though it wasn't match day, the lawn was full. "Draco, did I do something wrong?" Goyle asked, bewildered, trying to remember if he'd slipped up. Draco said nothing, his expression cold as if he were Snape in potions. Goyle felt awkward, and for some reason afraid to meet Draco's eyes whenever the boy sat behind the mirror. Silence stretched for several tense seconds. "Goyle, I've told you more than once. Act natural. Do you understand? Stop always looking at me. Am I wearing signs on my face?" For nearly 2 months, Draco had spent most of his time staging filmed scenes. The script was ready. Last year's Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook, blended with Lockhart's novels, lightly adapted, an easy production that shouldn't have needed changed lines. But Draco had underestimated the younger students' shortcomings. Not just Goyle. Everyone had their quirks. Spacing out, forgetting lines, posing for the mirror. "Goyle, this is your last chance. No more snacks if you mess up. Now go play the wounded villager and try to look natural." Draco's patience snapped. He was exhausted by the amateurish, affected performances. The kids insisted on being over the top and unnatural, delivering lines in a way that made Draco want to scream. "Sorry, everyone, only 2 chapters today." The company insisted on holding a meeting at noon, so Shouty had 2 fewer hours to write. Sorry. Chapter 240. There is one more island under my name. Quidditch training grounds buzzed with motion. Draco watched the players rehearse over and over, filming them again and again. He wasn't a particularly good cinematographer, but he kept repeating something Eno had once said, "A good story never feels contrived." That line had become his guiding rule. He could not let viewers feel they were watching actors recite a script. 2 months had passed, and they still hadn't finished a short film. The delay drained everyone's enthusiasm, and Draco's popularity had steadily slipped. "It doesn't matter. I'll go recruit in Diagon Alley during the summer," he told himself after another failed take. His nerves frayed. Draco slumped against the stands. "Maybe the problem's with you," someone suggested. "Want to try our method?" George and Fred saw their opening and slipped out of the crowd. "The problem isn't me, it's them," Draco urged, too weary to argue. The Weasley twins' arrival gave him a target for his frustration. "We know," George said, shrugging. "So the key is, you can't let them see the mirror," Fred added, hitting the nail on the head. "An anti-peeking cloak. Cover the mirror with it, and from a distance the mirror just blends into the background." George pulled a folded, weathered tablecloth from his pocket. Without waiting for Draco to ask, Fred draped it over the 3-foot mirror. The cloth covered it perfectly. Draco paused, confused, then asked the obvious question, "Why are you helping me?" "First of all, this isn't charity," George corrected. "We're friends with Eno, and he isn't at Hogwarts right now," so Fred left the rest unsaid. The phrase, "Eno's friends," melted some of Draco's resistance, and he didn't have the energy to press for more. Under the tattered cloth, the mirror did indeed seem to disappear. Up close one might make out its outline, but from a short distance it vanished. "How much for this thing? I'll buy it." Draco reached for his pouch. "It's free," Fred said, folding his hands. Draco blinked. Since when did the Weasleys refuse payment? He remembered them selling fireworks for nuts during the last Quidditch match. "Free? Then what do you want?" "We want to watch," the twins said in unison. "All right, but no messing about." Draco thought for a moment, then nodded and strode back toward the players. "Everyone, get ready. One more time. No mirror this time. Relax and rehearse." Hogwarts always hummed with life and vitality. The atmosphere on Briony Island, by contrast, was severe and taut. Daron had returned, dragon trainers were on site, and Lucius Malfoy stood with a group of Croatian pureblood wizards. Croatia, a coastal country of about 4 million people and roughly 50,000 square kilometers, had sent a large delegation. Including the Minister of Magic, 30 officials had arrived. "I respect your sovereignty," Lucius said, his gaze cold as it swept over the Croatian delegation, "but I do not recognize your claim to capability. 23 wizards, all bound and brought here. If they can come to my dragon farm today, what's to stop them from attacking mainland Britain tomorrow or raiding the International Confederation of Wizards the next day?" The Croatian Minister of Magic, a bald man in his 50s, wiped his brow and smiled a strained apology. "Mr. Malfoy, this is a misunderstanding." Lucius cut him off with a pointed gesture at the 23 wizards tied on the ground. His meaning was clear. One of the Croatian entourage couldn't help but blurt out a retort, and the mood shifted. The minister sighed helplessly. Lucius broke into a small, triumphant smile. "Since they have nothing to do with you," Lucius began. The minister, realizing the rhetorical trap, tried to forestall it. He knew what that admission implied, that the island's presence was not under their jurisdiction. Forced into a corner, he made the concession Lucius had been steering toward. "I agree to lease Briony Island to the Malfoy family. Let's put this matter to rest." Eno, watching the exchange, recognized the tactic at once. Lucius had the old British knack for getting the other side to say the crucial sentence. Once a sovereign disavowed connection to an incursion, they had implicitly admitted the territory wasn't under their control. Rather than accept liability and the messy process of tracing the real culprits, the minister chose the safer route. Wash his hands of the problem and accept a small loss. As begrudging as he was, it was probably the best outcome Croatia could manage given the numbers involved. 23 wizards against a ministry of 30. Lucius didn't stop there. "Not least to Malfoy," he corrected smoothly, "but leased to Swinburne. Briony Island will be leased for 1 galleon a year, with no time limit on the lease." He had the contract ready, and it was a standard Ministry of Magic lease. The minister signed, and the agreement took immediate effect. Eno felt a jolt of astonishment. Suddenly, a small island was officially under his name, complete with legal title and recognition. He looked at Lucius as if to ask why, but Lucius only offered a slight, inscrutable smile. As a matter of fact, Lucius went on, without your help, this dragon farm would have collapsed long ago, and we would have been forced to pay enormous compensation. His words were emotionally charged, and on the surface, reasonable. If someone had said them 2 months earlier, Eno might have believed them wholeheartedly. But after 2 months at the dragon farm, Eno knew the true value wasn't in the buildings or even the dragons themselves. It was in market share and the operation's future. Uncle Lucius, I accept the island, Eno said finally, but Draco's shares will not change. Hearing that Draco's stake would remain intact, Lucius broke into delighted laughter. Excellent. Then you'll both run the place. I'll handle the initial construction and cover Darren and the staff's salaries. And so, with that exchange and the signed lease, an unspoken understanding was reached.